You're listening to Tiamat's Resurrection, Book 3 of the Leviathan's Covenant series. We hope you enjoy your journey. Chapter 1. The Mother's Stirring. The world trembled as if the gods themselves had stirred from eons of slumber. In the shadowed halls of the phantom cartography house, long abandoned since the Carrington storm's fury, Sibylla Thorne gripped the edge of her oaken drafting table, her knuckles whitening against the splintered wood. Maps of impossible currents, lines that twisted like veins of lightning through the Atlantic, fluttered wildly in the gusts whipping through the cracked windows. Outside, London drowned in chaos. The Thames, once a sluggish serpent of commerce, now roared with unnatural tides, surging against the embankments as if seeking to reclaim the city for the deep. Sibylla's breath came in sharp, electric bursts, her skin prickling with the familiar hum of bioelectric sensitivity. It wasn't just the storm. It was something older, vaster. Abyssos, her lover, her anchor, the sentient storm that coursed through her veins like liquid fire. He was restless tonight, his essence flickering within her, a plasma heartbeat against her ribs. She wakes, his voice thrummed in her bones, not words but pulses of current that made her teeth ache and her core clench with forbidden need. The mother stirs. Dr. Euphemia Blackwater burst through the door, her woolen skirt sodden, spectacles fogged from the relentless downpour. Sibylla! The telegraphs are silent, no, worse. They're screaming. Reports from the colonies, tsunamis swallowing Singapore, whirlpools devouring fleets off Cape Horn. And the trench. It's alive. Effie's voice cracked, her usually composed demeanor frayed like the lightning-scarred skies beyond. Maris Deepwell followed close behind, her dark curls plastered to her face, carrying a satchel bulging with salvaged instruments. The former dockside worker, now a key in Sibylla's network of conductors, wiped rain from her eyes. The docks are gone, Sib. Ships torn from their moorings like toys. I felt it in my blood. Same as you. Like the seas calling us home. Sibylla nodded, pushing back from the table. Her body ached from the last anchoring, faint scorch marks still lingering on her inner thighs, where Abyssos had manifested most intensely. The pleasure of it had been exquisite agony, waves of current crashing through her until she shattered, his form solidifying in her embrace only to dissipate at dawn. But now, there was no time for reminiscence. The world was unraveling, threads of the oceanic tapestry pulling taut under the weight of awakening. We sail for the Mariana, Sibylla declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. If Tiamat calls, we answer. Before Flint does. The Iron Fleet, Admiral Cornelius Flint's monstrous armada, caged in Faraday iron to trap the very essence they sought to weaponize. Sibylla had evaded them through the drowned cities, outmaneuvered their electric hunters in the abyssal cathedral. But with Tiamat rising, Flint would see his chance for supremacy, not just overseas, but over the primordial heart of the world. As they gathered what remained, copper coils, etheric maps, vials of salt water infused with Abyssos's spark, the ground heaved. A low rumble built from the Earth's core, shaking the cartography house until plaster rained from the ceiling. Sibylla staggered, Abyssos surging protectively through her, his energy coiling around her spine like a lover's grasp. Hold, he pulsed, and she did, grounding herself in the flood of him. Outside, the storm broke fully. Lightning forked across the heavens, not in jagged bolts, but in vast, undulating sheets that mimicked the sea's wrath. Waves crashed over the city's seawalls, carrying the briny scent of the deep Atlantic mingled with something ancient, ozone and salt and the faint metallic tang of blood. They fled to the hidden cutter, moored in the Thames' shadowed bends. The Ether's Whisper, a vessel reinforced with conductive plating that hummed in harmony with Sibylla's touch. Maris manned the sails, her strong hands pulling ropes slick with rain, while Effie calibrated the etheric compass, its needle spinning wildly toward the southern Pacific. As they slipped into the open channel, the upheavals intensified. Earthquakes rippled across the ocean floor, sending geysers of steam and foam skyward. Schools of fish boiled to the surface, their scales shimmering with unnatural bioluminescence, as if the sea's hidden lights had been roused. Sibylla stood at the prow, wind lashing her auburn hair, Abyssos's presence a constant thrum in her blood. "Tell me of her," she whispered to the storm, knowing he would answer. "Tiamat," Abyssos replied, his voice a cascade of static that made her nipples harden against the chill fabric of her blouse. "The first mother, dismembered by the sky god, her body the cradle of seas and lands. I am but a splinter of her rage, cast into the currents by the Carrington fire." His essence dipped lower, teasing the apex of her thighs, a promise of the anchoring to come. "She calls us back, to remake or to unmake." Sibylla shivered, pressing her legs together against the illicit spark. Even in crisis, he tempted her, their bond a dangerous dance of desire and destruction. She had mapped the unmappable for him, surrendered her body to his electric embrace. But this was the abyss staring back. Days blurred into a nightmare voyage. They skirted the edges of the Atlantic's fury, where hurricanes birthed from nowhere spun with eyes like black pearls. In the mid-Pacific, they witnessed the first true harbinger, a Leviathan rival, not Abyssos's kin, but a twisted behemoth of kelp and current, thrashing against the waves as if birthed prematurely from Tiamat's womb. Its form was semi-corporeal, tendrils of water and lightning lashing out, sinking a merchant brig in seconds. "She's fracturing," Effie murmured from the cabin, poring over her journals. "The goddess's awakening splinters the oceanic consciousness. More like that one will rise, hungry and unbound." Maris spat over the rail. "And Flint? He'll cage 'em all, turn the sea into his personal thunderbox." Sibylla said nothing, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the water darkened as if inked by the depths below. That night, as the ether's whisper cut through calmer waters, the psychic call came. It struck like a harpoon to the soul. Sibylla collapsed to the deck, her body arching as visions flooded her mind. Vast chasms of the Mariana Trench yawned before her, bioluminescent veins pulsing along walls that breathed like flesh. At the nadir, Tiamat stirred. A colossal form of swirling abyss, eyes like twin maelstroms opening to behold her children. "Return," the goddess intoned, her voice a tidal wave of memory and wrath. "My fragments, my betrayers, the parasites of land must drown, or you shall forge with me the new tide." Abyssos writhed within her, his energy spiking in ecstasy and terror. "Mother!" he pulsed, and Sibylla felt the pull, an inexorable draw toward the trench that made her womb ache with longing. The call echoed through her network, she knew. Effie gasping in the cabin, Maris clutching the wheel as her own sensitivity flared. When the vision released her, Sibylla lay spent, her chemise damp with sweat and the faint char of overtaxed nerves. Abyssos soothed her, his currents lapping gently at her sensitized skin, coaxing a soft moan from her lips. "We go to her," she whispered, rising unsteadily. "But on our terms." The convergence loomed as they neared the trench's periphery. Scout ships of the Iron Fleet appeared on the horizon, hulking behemoths plated in unyielding metal, their stacks belching smoke that warred with the electric sky. Signal flares arced like dying stars, summoning the armada. From the crow's nest, Maris called down. "Flint's dogs, 10 points off the starboard bow, and more coming, the whole bloody fleet." Effie joined Sibylla at the rail, her face pale. "He's mobilizing everything. If he reaches the trench first, he'll chain Tiamat herself, turn her into a weapon to rule the waves." Sibylla's hand strayed to the pendant at her throat, a shard of conductive crystal infused with Abyssos's essence. "Then we beat him there. Anchor me, love. she murmured to the air, feeling him respond with a surge that pulled heat between her legs. Show them what we're made of. As the sun dipped toward the roiling sea, painting the waves in blood and gold, the ether's whisper plunged onward. Storms gathered anew, earthquakes sending swells like mountainous fists crashing around them. Tiamat's call pulsed rhythmically now, a siren song laced with apocalypse, drawing not just Sibylla's ragtag crew, but the fleets of nations, the rival leviathans, and the unraveling fabric of the world itself. In the deepening twilight, Sibylla retreated to the cabin, the door latching with a soft click. Effie and Maris knew better than to disturb her now. The anchoring was necessary. Abyssos needed flesh to guide them through the chaos, and she needed his power to survive it. Stripping away her salt-crusted garments, she lay on the narrow bunk, her skin glowing faintly with latent charge. "Come to me," she breathed. And he did. The air crackled, ozone sharp in her nostrils as his plasma form coalesced above her. Not fully solid yet, but enough. Tendrils of light caressing her breasts, coiling around her nipples until they peaked like storm-tossed buoys. She arched into him, gasping as current kissed her clit, a teasing flicker that built to a thunderous pulse. Abyssos's voice hummed against her ear. "You are my anchor, Sibylla. My sea. Let me fill you." His essence plunged deeper, waves of pleasure pain radiating from her core, her body convulsing as he anchored fully. Flesh formed, warm, crackling skin pressing against hers, his mouth claiming her in a kiss that tasted of salt water and lightning. She wrapped her legs around him, nails digging into his manifesting back, urging him on. The rhythm built, hips grinding in electric frenzy, each thrust sending shocks through her nerves that bordered on ecstasy's edge. "More," she demanded, and he gave, his form solidifying with every climax until they shattered together. Her cries muffled against his shoulder, his pulses fading into satisfied static. When it ended, Abyssos lingered in partial form, his head on her breast, listening to her racing heart. "The trench calls us to surrender," he murmured, fingers tracing the fresh burns on her hips. "Will you?" Sibylla stared at the cabin's slanted ceiling, the ship's timbers groaning under another swell. "Not to her. Not to him. To us." But as the Iron Fleet's silhouettes darkened the horizon and Tiamat's psychic whispers grew insistent, Sibylla wondered if surrender was the only path left. The global oceans convulsed in sympathy with their mistress's rousing. Off the coast of Japan, a megaquake split the seafloor, birthing islands from the deep, only to swallow them again in foaming maws. In the Antarctic, ice shelves carved with roars that echoed like divine fury, freeing currents long frozen. And in the heart of the Pacific, toward which Sibylla's vessel hurtled, the Mariana Trench pulsed like a vein in the world's throat, bioluminescence flaring in rhythmic warning. Admiral Flint stood on the bridge of his flagship, the HMS Thunderclap, his one good hand gripping the rail as the deck pitched. His prosthetic arm, a crude iron forge of gears and insulated wire, whirred faintly, the stump beneath it throbbing with phantom lightning. "Full steam," he barked to his first officer, eyes narrowed on the etheric scanners flickering with anomalous readings. "The trench is the key. Seize it, and the seas are ours." His fleet, 20 ironclads strong, each a floating fortress against the electric unknown, cut through the swells, harpoons and net launchers, primed for Leviathan capture. Flint had lost too much to the storms already, his arm to a plasma surge, his ambition nearly to Sibylla's meddling. But Tiamat, she would be his crowning glory, her power bent to Britannia's will. Unseen by the Admiral, Tiamat's call rippled through the depths, summoning not just humanity's predators, but her own scattered progeny. Rival leviathans stirred in the shadows, forms of ink and thunder, kelp-woven horrors, converging on the trench like moths to an abyssal flame. Sibylla's group pressed on, the psychic bond tightening. Visions plagued their sleep. Memories of Tiamat's dismemberment, her blood the salt of all seas, her bones the ocean floor. Abyssos shared fragments. His birth from her shattered consciousness during the Carrington blaze, a spark of vengeance adrift. By dawn of the 5th day, the trench loomed in their instruments, a gravitational scar on the sea's face. Storms encircled it like a crown of thorns, lightning-weaving barriers no ship could breach unaided. "We dive," Sibylla said, her voice laced with resolve and the afterglow of anchoring. Effie prepared the submersible pod, a copper sphere etched with conductive runes. Maris secured the mooring lines, her face set in grim determination. Abyssos, partially anchored in Sibylla's side, pulsed agreement. As they launched into the maelstrom, the fleet's vanguard appeared. 3 ironclads breaking through the outer swells, cannons thundering in futile challenge to the gods. The convergence had begun, forces of empire, entity and earth colliding in the mother's stirring. Deeper they descended, pressure mounting like the weight of fate. Tiamat's presence enveloped them, a psychic embrace that whispered of dissolution and rebirth. Sibylla felt it in her marrow. The choice loomed, sacrifice or merger, love or annihilation. And in the electric dark, Abyssos kissed her palm, his light the only certainty amid the foreboding tide. Chapter 2. Sanctuary of Sensitives. The salt-laced wind of Whitby howled through the cracked windows of the electric asylum, carrying whispers of the sea's unrest. Sibylla Thorne stepped over the threshold, her boots echoing on the warped wooden floors, the air thick with the tang of ozone and damp stone. Once a grim repository for the storm-touched, those unfortunate souls branded mad by their sensitivity to the Carrington's lingering echoes, the asylum now stood as her bulwark against the encroaching tide of persecution. She had claimed it weeks ago, under the cover of Euphemia's forged documents and Maris's street-sharp cunning, turning its shadowed halls into a haven for the likes of them, women and men whose bodies hummed with the sea's electric secrets. Sibylla's fingers trailed along the corridor wall, feeling the faint pulse of embedded copper wiring, a relic of the asylum's experimental past. Her own bioelectric field thrummed in response, a low vibration that made her skin prickle. Abyssos stirred within her, his essence a coiling current in her veins, not fully anchored but ever present, like the tide pulling at her bones. "This place reeks of fear," his voice crackled in her mind, a static-laced murmur that sent shivers racing down her spine. "But we will charge it with purpose." She pushed open the door to the old treatment room, now repurposed as their central chamber. Dr. Euphemia Blackwater stood at a scarred oak table, her spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose as she pored over sketches of conductivity arrays. Effie's dark hair was pinned in a no-nonsense chignon, but stray wisps escaped, frizzed by the ambient charge in the air. Beside her, Maris Deepwell lounged against a cabinet, her fisherman's sweater rolled to her elbows, revealing tattoos of swirling waves inked in faded blue. Maris's eyes, sharp as a gull's, flicked up to meet Sibylla's. "Sib," Maris greeted, her voice a low drawl laced with the North Sea's burr. "Heard the cart rattling up the hill. Got fresh meat for the grinder?" Sibylla allowed a small smile. "3 new ones, straight from the docks. A seamstress who shorts out her needles, a lighthouse keeper who sees ghosts in the lightning, and a lad from the wharves who claims the gulls whisper Admiralty secrets to him." Effie looked up, her expression a mix of clinical curiosity and maternal warmth. "We'll need to assess them carefully. The network grows, but so does the risk. Flint's reach extends even here, to these forsaken cliffs." The doctor was right. Admiral Cornelius Flint's Iron Fleet prowled the coasts, his agents sniffing out anomalies like hounds after blood. But in this asylum, perched on Whitby's jagged headland, they were building something unbreakable. A sisterhood, a brotherhood, a coven of conductors who could channel the Leviathan's power without being consumed. "Bring them in," Sibylla said, nodding to Maris. "And ready the saline pools. We'll start with the basics." Mary slipped out, her steps light and purposeful. Sibylla crossed to the table, peering at Effie's diagrams. Intricate lines depicted human forms linked by coils of wire and basins of seawater, arrows indicating flows of bioelectric energy. "You've outdone yourself, Effie. If we can train them to anchor fragments like I do with Abyssos..." Effie adjusted her spectacles. "It's not just about power, Sib. It's about community. These sensitives have been hunted, locked away, branded as hysterics or witches. Here, they learn they're not broken. They're the bridge between worlds." The door creaked open again, admitting the newcomers under Maris's watchful eye. The seamstress, a wiry woman named Leora with calloused hands and wide, fearful eyes, clutched a bundle of singed fabric. Beside her stood Harlan, the lighthouse keeper, his face weathered like driftwood, a faint glow flickering at his fingertips. Trailing them was young Theo, barely out of his teens, his mop of sandy hair disheveled, eyes darting as if expecting pursuit. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Sibylla said, her voice steady, projecting the calm she had fought to cultivate. "Here, your gifts are not curses. They are weapons if you choose to wield them." Leora swallowed hard. "They say you're the storm bride, that you bed lightning itself. Is it true?" A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension, but Sibylla met her gaze unflinchingly. "I am Sibylla Thorne, cartographer of the unseen currents. And yes, I share my body with a force older than the seas. But we're all bound to it now, since the Carrington woke what slept beneath the waves. Sit. Listen. Learn." They gathered around the table, the air humming with unspoken energy. Effie began the orientation, her lecture a blend of science and myth, explaining how the cosmic storm had imprinted the oceans with sentient electricity, birthing entities like Abyssos, fragments of Tiamat's shattered consciousness. Sensitives like them could conduct that power, anchoring it into flesh, but without guidance, it burned them from the inside out. "The key," Effie said, tapping a diagram, "is harmony. Your bioelectric field must resonate with the entity's frequency. Pain can bridge it, but pleasure sustains it." Maris smirked, leaning back. "Aye, and we've got the scars to prove the first part. But stick with us, and you'll taste the fire without the blaze." As the afternoon waned, they moved to the asylum's lower levels, where the saline pools gleamed under gaslight lanterns. The water, drawn from Whitby's tidal pools and laced with copper salts, shimmered with latent charge. Sibylla stripped off her coat, rolling up her sleeves to reveal the faint, web-like scars tracing her arms, marks from nights when Abyssos's anchoring had pushed her to the edge. "We'll pair you," she instructed. "Leora with Maris, Harlan with me, Theo with Effie. Immerse yourselves. Feel the pull." The pools were divided by low stone walls, each a shallow basin fed by underground springs. Steam rose faintly, carrying the mineral bite of the sea. Maris helped Leora into the water, the seamstress gasping as the liquid kissed her skin, tiny sparks dancing at the points of contact. "Breathe through it," Maris murmured, wading in beside her. Her hand found Leora's waist, steadying her. "Let it in, lass. Don't fight." Across the room, Effie guided Theo, her touch clinical yet reassuring on his shoulder. Harlan hesitated at the edge with Sibylla, his broad frame tense. "I've lost colleagues to this," he admitted, voice rough. "Storms that weren't storms, lights in the deep that called them out to sea." Sibylla nodded, slipping into the pool first. The water enveloped her legs, warm and insistent, awakening Abyssos fully. His presence surged, a delicious ache blooming in her core. "That's why we're here, to answer the call on our terms. Join me." Harlan lowered himself in, the water rising to his chest. Immediately, his hands clenched, veins standing out as blue-white arcs flickered across his skin. Sibylla reached for him, her palm pressing to his forearm. The contact was electric, literally. A jolt passed between them, not painful but invigorating, like the first sip of strong spirits. "Feel that?" she whispered, her voice husky as Abyssos' energy flowed through her. "That's the bridge. Now, invite it deeper." Harlan's eyes widened, pupils dilating as the current sought harmony. Sibylla guided his hand to her collarbone, where her pulse thrummed strongest. The air crackled, the pool's surface rippling with induced waves. In her mind, Abyssos chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. "He tastes of salt and storm. Train him well, my anchor." The training intensified as dusk fell, the lanterns casting elongated shadows. In the adjacent pool, Maris had Leora pressed against the stone rim, their bodies half submerged, breaths mingling in the humid air. Maris's fingers traced patterns on Leora's back, coaxing the energy to flow. "Like this," Maris breathed, her lips brushing the seamstress's ear. "Surrender to the surge. Let it fill you." Leora's gasp echoed, her body arching as sparks leaped from her fingertips to Maris's. It was intimate, this sharing. Bodies as conduits, pleasure amplifying the resonance. Maris's own sensitivity flared, her tattooed skin glowing faintly, and she pulled Leora closer, their hips aligning in the water. The connection deepened, a moan escaping Leora as the current peaked, binding them in a momentary circuit of ecstasy. Sibylla watched from the corner of her eye, her own session with Harlan reaching a fever pitch. His hands, calloused from years gripping lanterns, now trembled with power as he mirrored her movements. She straddled the stone bench in the pool, drawing him near, their torsos brushing. The contact ignited a cascade, Abyssos' essence spilling over, threading into Harlan's field. Pain and pleasure intertwined, her nerves singing as the energy coursed through them both. "Hold it," Sibylla urged, her voice a thread of control amid the building storm. Her thighs clenched around him, the water churning as arcs of plasma danced on the surface. Harlan's groan was primal, his forehead pressing to hers, sweat beading despite the cool depths. The anchoring was erotic in its intensity, body slick and charged, every touch a spark that bordered on combustion. Across the way, Effie and Theo's pairing was gentler, the doctor murmuring equations and encouragements. But even there, the air hummed with undercurrents of awakening desire. Theo's youthful frame flushed, his hands tentatively exploring the flow under Effie's guidance, her steady presence grounding him as the power built. Hours passed in this ritual of empowerment, the asylum alive with the symphony of gasps, splashes, and crackling discharges. By midnight, they emerged, exhausted but transformed. Leora clutched Maris's arm, her eyes alight with newfound confidence. Harlan clapped Theo on the back, the two men sharing a nod of solidarity. Effie tallied notes in her journal, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "The network strengthens," Sibylla declared, toweling her hair as they reconvened in the central chamber. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm glows over their damp forms. Bottles of rum passed hand to hand, a communal toast to their shared fire. "To the sensitives," Maris raised her glass. No longer alone in the storm. Cheers echoed, but Sibylla's gaze lingered on the shadows beyond the windows. Abyssos whispered caution in her ear, a static hiss. Eyes watch from the cliffs. Betrayal, bruise. The next days blurred into a rhythm of recruitment and refinement. Word spread through underground channels, smugglers' whispers, dockside graffiti in code, drawing more to the asylum's gates. A widow from Scarborough who dreamed in lightning, twins from Hull whose touches shocked livestock, a former naval surgeon haunted by phantom currents. Sibylla's maps adorned the walls now, not just of seas, but of ley lines, invisible networks of power snaking through the land and water. Training evolved, the pools giving way to more advanced sessions in the asylum's electrotherapy rooms. Copper harnesses dangled from ceilings, linked to galvanic batteries modified by Effie to simulate Leviathan pulses. Maris took charge of combat drills, teaching the newcomers to discharge bursts of energy, stuns for pursuers, shields against probes. One evening, as rain lashed the cliffs, Sibylla led a group ritual in the grand hall. Velvet drapes muffled the storm, candles flickering in sconces. The sensitives formed a circle, hands linked, their fields merging into a collective hum. Sibylla stood at the center, invoking Abyssos fully for the first time in the asylum. "Come," she breathed, shedding her gown to stand bare before them, vulnerability a deliberate offering. The air thickened, ozone sharp as her skin ignited with plasma veins. Abyssos manifested partially, his form a humanoid silhouette of crackling blue, hovering above the salt circle etched on the floor. The group watched in awe as Sibylla arched into him, the anchoring a public act of communion. Pleasure ripped through her, raw and unfiltered, her cries echoing as his energy flooded her. Bodies in the circle responded, their own fields resonating, hands tightening in shared ecstasy. Maris bit her lip, eyes dark with desire. Effie traced runes on her palm, grounding the surge. Even the newcomers trembled, feeling the power vicariously. It was extra spicy, this merging. Not just Sibylla's surrender, but the collective thrill, bodies alive with the sea's forbidden kiss. Abyssos's pulses caressed her intimately, waves of current stroking nerves she hadn't known existed, building to a climax that left her gasping, the circle pulsing in unison. As the entity receded, Sibylla collapsed to her knees, spent but empowered. "This is our strength," she panted. "United, we conduct the storm itself." Applause rippled through the hall, bonds forged in that electric afterglow. But as the gathering dispersed, Maris pulled Sibylla aside, her expression grim. "One of the new ones, Theo. He's been slipping out at night. Says he's checking the perimeter, but I followed him once. Met with a shadow on the path to town." Sibylla's blood chilled, Abyssos's warning confirmed. "Flint's spies." Effie joined them, overhearing. "We can't root them out without fracturing trust. But if they report back, the Iron Fleet will descend like wolves." The haven's communal warmth now carried an undercurrent of paranoia. Sibylla patrolled the halls that night, her senses heightened, every creak a potential intruder. In her chamber, alone with the sea's murmur through the window, she anchored Abyssos shallowly, seeking solace in his touch. "They come for us," she whispered, her body yielding to the current as it coiled around her limbs, intimate and possessive. "Let them," Abyssos replied, his plasma form solidifying against her, hands of lightning cupping her breasts, sending jolts of pleasure pain. Their union was fierce, a reaffirmation amid uncertainty, thrusts of energy that mimicked flesh, building to shattering release. She clung to him, nails digging into ephemeral skin as waves of ecstasy washed away the fear, if only for the night. Dawn broke with urgency. In the central chamber, Sibylla confronted the group, her voice ironclad. "We are a sanctuary, but sanctuaries can be breached. Watch your sisters, your brothers. Trust but verify. Flint's hand reaches long, but ours conducts the thunder." Theo's face paled, but he said nothing. As the day wore on, training continued with wary glances. Leora confided in Maris about odd questions from Harlan. Effie noted discrepancies in supply logs, suggesting sabotage. By evening, the spies revealed themselves. Not in violence, but in a desperate bid. Harlan cornered Sibylla in the corridor, a concealed galvanic prod in hand, its tip humming with stolen charge. "For the Empire!" he snarled, lunging. But Sibylla was ready. Abyssos surged through her, deflecting the prod with a burst from her palm. The discharge hurled Harlan back, his body convulsing as the asylum's wards, Effie's clever arrays, amplified the shock, binding him in crackling nets. Theo burst in then, eyes wild, but Maris was behind him, a loop of copper wire at his throat, charged just enough to paralyze. "Traitors!" Sibylla spat as the others gathered, faces a mix of betrayal and resolve. Effie stepped forward, syringe in hand, not to harm, but to sedate. They'll be confined, questioned, but this changes nothing. We build on. As the spies were dragged away, the sanctuary stood firmer, its communal spirit tempered by fire. Sibylla looked to the sea, where Tiamat's stirrings echoed faintly. The network was born in earnest, allies forged in the crucible of trust and trial, ready for the storms to come. Chapter 3: The Iron Reckoning. The salt-laced wind howled through the jagged cliffs of Whitby, carrying the distant rumble of thunder that no natural storm could muster. Sibylla Thorne stood at the asylum's crumbling parapet, her fingers gripping the weathered stone as if it were the only anchor in a world unraveling. Below, the North Sea churned, its waves frothing with an unnatural fury, lit by sporadic flashes that danced like captive spirits. The electric asylum, once a sanctuary for the storm-touched, now buzzed with frantic energy, its halls filled with the murmurs of her network of conductors, women and men whose bodies hummed with the same forbidden sensitivity that coursed through her veins. It had been mere days since they fortified this forsaken whaling outpost into a haven, recruiting the persecuted and the afflicted. Dr. Euphemia Blackwater's experiments with copper coils and saltwater baths had begun to yield results, training the sensitives to channel faint pulses without shattering their nerves. Maris Deepwell, with her street-honed resilience, organized patrols along the shore, her latent conductivity making her a natural sentinel. But whispers of spies had infiltrated their ranks, shadows cast by Admiral Flint's relentless pursuit. Sibylla felt it in her bones, a prickling warning, like the prelude to a lightning strike. Abyssos stirred within her, not fully anchored but a constant undercurrent in her blood, his essence whispering through her bioelectric field. They come. His voice pulsed, a vibration that resonated in her marrow, intimate and insistent. Iron and fire, seeking to cage what cannot be contained. She pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart raced in sync with the sea's turmoil. The anchoring rituals had become more frequent, each one etching deeper into her flesh, blurring the line between her humanity and his boundless form. Pleasure and pain intertwined in those moments, a surrender that both sustained and eroded her. Last night's communion had left her trembling, her skin etched with faint, glowing veins that faded only at dawn. She craved it still, the way his electricity flooded her, making her feel alive in ways no mortal touch could. A cry from below shattered her reverie. "Ships! On the horizon!" Maris's voice cut through the gale, sharp as a harpoon. Sibylla leaned over the edge, her dark hair whipping across her face. There, slicing through the swells like predatory sharks, came the Iron Fleet, hulking vessels clad in Faraday cages of woven copper and iron plating, their sails billowing black against the storm-grey sky. Cannon ports gleamed, and atop the lead ship, the HMS Thunderer, a figure stood rigid. Admiral Cornelius Flint, his one good arm raised in command, the other, a bandaged stump swathed in oilcloth that did little to hide the suppurating wound beneath. "It's him," Sibylla breathed, a chill coiling in her gut. Flint's obsession had festered like his injury, ever since that fateful encounter in the Phantom Cartography House where Abyssos's discharge had seared his flesh. Now, he sought not just control, but annihilation. Alarms clanged through the asylum as conductors scrambled to their posts. Effie Blackwater emerged from the lower laboratories, her spectacles fogged, a satchel of makeshift galvanic devices slung over her shoulder. "Sibylla, we must prepare the perimeter coils. If they breach the harbor—" "They won't," Sibylla interrupted, her voice steel-clad. But doubt gnawed at her. The asylum's defenses were nascent, a web of exposed wires and saltwater trenches that could amplify conductivity but shatter under sustained fire. She needed Abyssos, fully, fiercely anchored, to turn the tide. The first broadside erupted, cannon fire blooming like thunderflowers across the water. Shells screamed toward the cliffs, exploding in geysers of rock and foam. One struck the asylum's eastern wing, sending shards of slate raining down. Screams echoed from within as a section of the wall buckled. Sibylla's network rallied. Maris directed a group to the shore, their bodies linked in a human chain, hands clasped to share the load of ambient electricity. Sparks leaped between them, forming a flickering barrier that diverted a stray shot into the sea. But it was tenuous, a candle against the gale. "Anchor me," Abyssos urged, his pulse quickening in her veins, laced with hunger. "Let me taste their iron, shatter their cages." She descended the spiral stairs 2 at a time, her boots pounding against the salt-crusted stone. The central chamber awaited, a vast domed room once used for hydrotherapy, now converted into their ritual heart. A pool of briny water dominated the center, ringed by copper conduits that snaked into the walls, connecting to the asylum's grid. The air hummed with static, the scent of ozone thick as perfume. Effie barred the door behind her. "This is madness, Sib. The fleet outguns us tenfold. Even with him—" "I know," Sibylla snapped, stripping off her coat and bodice with urgent fingers. Her skin prickled, alive with anticipation. "But it's our only chance. Keep them at bay as long as you can." Alone now, she approached the pool, the water's surface rippling as if sensing her intent. Abyssos's presence swelled, a tidal pull drawing her in. She shed the rest of her garments, the cool air kissing her bare flesh, raising goose flesh that tingled with latent charge. Naked, vulnerable, she was the conduit, the bridge between worlds. Stepping into the pool, the salt water enveloped her legs, conductive and caressing. She sank to her knees, the liquid rising to her waist, then her breasts, as she submerged to her shoulders. The chill seeped into her pores, awakening every nerve. "Come to me," she thought. Not words, but a bioelectric summons, her field flaring like a beacon. The water boiled around her, bubbles rising in frantic bursts. Abyssos answered, his essence surging from the sea through the asylum's conduits, a living current that arced across the pool's surface. Pain lanced first, sharp as harpoons piercing her skin, grounding his form. She gasped, arching back, her muscles seizing in electric spasms. But then the pleasure. Oh, the exquisite flood. It started as warmth in her core, spreading outward in waves that mimicked the sea's caress. Her body became the vessel, his electricity weaving through her synapses, igniting synapses long dormant. She moaned, low and throaty, her hands clutching the pool's edge as tendrils of plasma began to coalesce above the water. He emerged not as flesh but as form, crackling humanoid silhouette of azure lightning, limbs branching like lightning-struck trees, eyes twin storms of white-hot energy. Abyssos reached for her, his touch a jolt that sent ecstasy rippling through her. Their anchoring was no gentle union, it was storm and surrender, her cries echoing off the dome as he poured into her, filling her until she brimmed with power. Pleasure built to a crescendo, her hips bucking involuntarily against the invisible currents that stimulated every inch of her. It was intimate violation, divine rapture. His essence probing deep, binding them in a rhythm as old as the tides. She climaxed with a scream that shattered a nearby vial, her biofield exploding outward in a pulse that lit the chamber like daylight. Fully anchored, Abyssos withdrew slightly, his form solidifying into a towering figure of coruscating energy, but the link remained, a throbbing chord of shared sensation. "We are one," he rumbled, voice like thunder in her mind. "Now, let us reckon with the iron." Sibylla rose from the pool, water streaming from her body, her skin aglow with embedded currents. She donned a loose shift, the fabric crackling against her, and strode to the parapet once more. The battle raged below. The Iron Fleet had closed to grapeshot range, their copper-netted hulls disgorging launches filled with red-coated Marines. Asylum defenders fired back with improvised arc throwers, bolts of stolen lightning felling men into the surf. But the Thunderer pressed on, its prow cutting toward the harbor like a blade. Flint stood on the quarterdeck, barking orders, his face a mask of scarred fury. The Admiral's prosthetic arm, a crude iron clamp fitted over his ruined stump, clanked as he gestured, but beneath the wrappings, infection raged. Each jolt from the sea's electromagnetic unrest sent agony lancing through him, the wound blackening, veins pulsing with unnatural heat. "Fire the harpoons!" Flint roared, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. The special weapons, copper-tipped lances designed to ground Leviathan discharges, launched toward the asylum's towers. One embedded in the western wall, trailing insulated cables meant to drain any surge. Sibylla felt the tug, a parasitic pull on the ambient field. "No," she whispered, raising her arms. Through her, Abyssos channeled, a torrent of bioelectric fury that leaped from her fingertips in forked lightning. It struck the harpoon, traveling the cable to explode aboard the nearest frigate. The ship shuddered, its Faraday cage overloading in a cascade of sparks, hull plating buckling as plasma vents erupted. Sailors screamed as the vessel listed, flames of ionized air consuming the decks. The sea itself rebelled, waves cresting with electric crests that lashed the fleet like whips. Abyssos laughed, a sound like cracking ice, his form expanding beside Sibylla, arms outstretched to direct the storm. The Admiral's fleet faltered, but Flint was unrelenting. "Full broadside! Sink the witch's lair!" Cannons thundered anew, shells arcing toward the asylum. One detonated near the shore, hurling Maris and her chain of conductors into the shallows. Sibylla's heart clenched. Maris surfaced, coughing, her arm charred but alive, rallying the others with defiant sparks. "They break upon us," Abyssos murmured, his energy brushing her mind with possessive heat. But the iron heart endures. Indeed, the Thunderer weathered the assault, its reinforced cages absorbing the discharges, though smoke billowed from strained joints. Sibylla focused, drawing deeper from their bond. The anchoring's afterglow lingered, a sensual hum that amplified her will. She envisioned the fleet as a chain, each ship a link to sever. With a cry she unleashed a directed surge, Abyssos's power manifesting as a colossal arc that bridged the harbor. It danced from mast to mast, grounding through the water in explosive boils. 2 corvettes shattered outright, their wooden frames splintering into kindling amid geysers of steam. The sea foamed white-hot, fish surfacing belly up, electrocuted en masse. The air reeked of burnt metal and ozone, the cliffs trembling with aftershocks. Flint staggered on his deck as a stray bolt clipped the Thunderer's rail, the impact jarring his wounded arm. Pain exploded, white-hot, consuming. The infection, aggravated by the electromagnetic flux, spread like wildfire, his vision blurring with fevered haze. "Press on," he gasped, but his voice cracked, the iron clamp slipping from sweat-slicked flesh. From the parapet, Sibylla locked eyes with him across the chaos. In that moment, she saw not just the hunter, but the man broken by his own ambition, a mirror to her own erosion. Pity flickered, swiftly drowned by resolve. Abyssos sensed her hesitation. "End him," he urged, his touch in her mind a caress laced with violence. "Or he will end us." She nodded, channeling one final devastating pulse. The bolt struck true, slamming into the Thunderer's prow. The cage held, but the overload was catastrophic. Generators whining to destruction, the deck erupting in a fountain of plasma. Flint was hurled backward, his arms' bandages igniting, the wound exposed in all its horror, blackened flesh sloughing from bone, pus sizzling on contact with the air. He collapsed, Marines rushing to his side as the ship veered, signals flying for retreat. The Iron Fleet, battered and broken, turned tail, limping into the storm-swept horizon. Sibylla sagged against the stone, the anchoring's toll crashing over her. Her vision swam, nerves frayed to threads, a deep ache blooming in her core where Abyssos's essence still lingered, both balm and burn. He dissipated slowly, returning to the sea's embrace, but not before brushing her thoughts with gratitude and hunger for more. Below, cheers rose from the survivors, but they were hollow. The eastern wing smoldered, bodies littered the shore, and Maris limped toward the asylum, supported by Effie. Losses mounted, the network strained. As the adrenaline faded, Sibylla touched her temple, feeling the faint pulse of new scars forming beneath her skin. The reckoning had come, but the war was far from over. Tiamat's stirrings echoed in the depths, a reminder that greater tempests brewed. In the quiet aftermath, she whispered to the fading echo of Abyssos, "What have we unleashed?" But the sea offered no answer, only the relentless crash of waves against the cliffs. Chapter 4. Descent into the Womb. The submersible groaned like a beast in labor as it plunged into the abyssal embrace of Tiamat's trench. Sibylla Thorne gripped the rusted railing, her knuckles whitening against the chill that seeped through the reinforced glass viewport. Outside, the ocean swallowed light whole, birthing a realm of perpetual twilight where pressure crushed the world into submission. Dr. Euphemia Blackwater hunched over the control panel, her fingers dancing across dials etched with forbidden sigils, remnants of her rogue experiments that had once mapped the Carrington echoes. Beside her, Maris Deepwell clutched a harness, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and defiance, the latent spark in her veins humming in sympathy with the depths. Abyssos was nowhere to be seen in his anchored form. Instead, he coursed through the submersible's copper conduits, a living current that made the lanterns flicker with erratic life. Sibylla felt him in her bones, a persistent thrum that echoed her heartbeat, pulling her toward the womb below. "Steady now," Effie murmured, her voice cutting through the creak of straining metal. "The trench isn't just deep, it's alive. Tiamat's breath stirs the currents." Maris swallowed hard, her voice a whisper laced with the salt of her past. "Alive like what? Like him?" She nodded toward the wiring where faint blue arcs danced. Sibylla placed a hand on her shoulder, the contact grounding them both. "More than him. She's the mother. And we're diving into her heart." The descent stretched into eternity, each fathom peeling away layers of reality. At first, the water was a velvet black, pierced only by the submersible's probing beams. Then, the bioluminescence began, a faint glow at the periphery, like veins pulsing beneath translucent skin. Sibylla pressed her forehead to the cold glass, willing her eyes to pierce the gloom. Shapes flickered, tendrils of light coiling like serpents, clusters of orbs that drifted with predatory grace. "Gods below," Maris breathed as the first horror manifested. It was a colossal jellyfish, its bell a pulsating dome of iridescent blue, trailing tentacles that spanned the viewport's width. But these were no mere appendages. They writhed with embedded eyes, unblinking orbs that fixed on the intruders, reflecting the submersible's lights in accusatory stares. Effie adjusted a lever, and the vessel veered sharply, the motion slamming Sibylla against the bulkhead. Abyssos surged through her then, unbidden, a jolt that arched her back and sent heat flooding her core. She gasped, clutching her chest as visions flickered at the edges of her sight. Ancient seas churning under a fractured sky, a goddess's form splintering into electric storms. "He's reacting," she panted, her voice husky with the echo of his presence. Maris steadied her, concern etching lines on her face. "To what? The lights?" "To her," Sibylla replied, nodding toward the depths. "He's remembering." Deeper they went, the pressure mounting like a lover's insistent grasp. The submersible's hull protested with metallic sighs, and Effie's instruments whirred, charting electromagnetic anomalies that spiked like fevered heartbeats. The bioluminescent horrors multiplied. Schools of anglerfish with lures that mimicked human faces, whispering illusions in the water. Gelatinous polyps that latched onto the hull, their suckers pulsing with hypnotic rhythms. One such polyp swarm engulfed them, turning the viewport into a mosaic of glowing flesh. Sibylla felt the vibration through her soles, a seductive hum that tugged at her bioelectric field. Abyssos manifested partially then, his plasma form coalescing in the cabin's center, a crackling silhouette of a man, eyes like stormlit horizons. "They are her children," he intoned, his voice a chorus of static and thunder rolling through the air. "Sentinels of the womb. We must pass the trial." Effie shot him a glare, her spectacles fogging from the sudden heat his presence generated. "Trial? We're not here for riddles, Leviathan. Get us through." Abyssos's form flickered, tendrils of electricity snaking toward Sibylla. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the ephemeral edge of him. Pleasure spiked through her, a sharp, electric ecstasy that made her knees buckle. In that touch, the visions intensified. She saw Tiamat not as myth, but as flesh, a colossal form coiled in the trench, scales shimmering with the birth of stars, her eyes abyssal voids that held the memory of creation. And Abyssos, her child, torn from her side in the great dismemberment, a fragment flung into the currents, seeking reunion. Sibylla's breath hitched as the vision bled into sensation, Tiamat's pulse syncing with her own, a maternal claim that stirred forbidden desires. Maris pulled her back as the submersible shuddered free of the polyps, the lights dimming briefly. "Sib, stay with us." But Sibylla's eyes remained distant, her body humming with residual charge. Abyssos withdrew slightly, his form dimming to a glow. "The descent awakens what was severed," he said softly, his gaze locking on Sibylla. "I am her echo, and you anchor the storm." The trench narrowed, walls closing in like the ribs of some primordial beast. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the rock faces, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters. Effie guided them through a chasm where thermal vents spewed superheated plumes, the water boiling with mineral ghosts. "Hold tight," she warned. "The currents here are treacherous, twisted by her dreams." A sudden whirlpool gripped the submersible, spinning it into a vortex of light and shadow. Alarms blared, and Maris screamed as loose instruments clattered. Sibylla anchored herself to Abyssos's essence, channeling him through her veins to stabilize the field. The effort was intimate, invasive. His energy flooded her nerves, igniting every synapse with liquid fire. She moaned involuntarily, the sound lost in the roar as pleasure pain blurred into one exquisite torment. Through the haze, she glimpsed horrors unbound. Eel-like creatures with jaws unhinging to reveal fractal maws, swarming in bioluminescent frenzy. Colossal squid whose ink clouds formed illusory embraces, drawing the mind into erotic reveries of dissolution. One such illusion snared Maris, her eyes glazing as she murmured of silken tentacles coiling around her limbs, promising surrender. Effie slapped her sharply, breaking the spell. "Fight it! They're her temptations, tests of will." Abyssos's voice cut through, resonant and commanding. "She calls her lost ones home. I feel it. The pull of the womb." His form solidified further, hands, ethereal yet tangible, reaching for Sibylla. She met him halfway, their union a conduit that lit the cabin in azure brilliance. The submersible righted, surging forward as his power bent the currents to their will. But the confrontation came not from beasts, but from within, as they leveled out in the trench's core. A vast cavern yawned before them, walls veined with glowing quartz that pulsed like arteries. Tiamat's presence was palpable, a psychic pressure that squeezed the air from their lungs. Abyssos staggered, his plasma flickering erratically. "Mother," he whispered, the word a crackle of lightning. Sibylla's visions crested then, overwhelming. She collapsed to her knees, the cabin spinning into a tapestry of memory. She saw the cataclysm. Tiamat's body rent asunder by Marduk's spear, her essence scattering into the seas, fragments like Abyssos, sparks of divine fury seeking wholeness. He had been her rage, the electric storm that birthed tempests, now adrift and yearning. In the vision, Tiamat's form enveloped him, a lover's embrace that was both nurturing and devouring, her waters flooding him with forgotten ecstasy. The intimacy of it bled into Sibylla's reality. Abyssos knelt before her, his energy coiling around her body like invisible chains. "See me," he urged, his touch ghosting over her skin, sending shivers of current through her breasts, down her abdomen, pooling hot between her thighs. She arched into it, gasping as the anchoring deepened, not mere stabilization, but a merging that blurred their boundaries. Effie and Maris watched, transfixed, as Sibylla's clothes seemed to hum with static, her skin glowing faintly. "Sib!" Maris cried, but Effie held her back. "Let it happen. This is the descent's heart." Abyssos's form pressed against her, solidifying into the lithe, crackling figure she knew, muscles etched in plasma, eyes burning with oceanic depth. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of salt and storm, electricity arcing between them. Sibylla surrendered to the surge, her hands exploring the contours of his ephemeral flesh, fingers tracing the veins of light that pulsed beneath. Pleasure built like a tidal wave, each caress amplifying the current until she cried out, her body convulsing in release that echoed through the submersible. In that climax, the visions clarified. Tiamat's demand, whispered through Abyssos's memories. "Return to me, fragment, or bind with the mortal and challenge my reclamation." Sibylla pulled back, breathless, her eyes meeting his. "You're hers," she said, voice raw. "But you're mine, too." He nodded, the conflict etching his features. "The womb calls, but our covenant holds." The cavern ahead glowed brighter, Tiamat's form stirring in the distance, a colossal shadow uncoiling. The horrors parted, granting passage, but the intimacy of the descent had changed them all. Maris averted her eyes, flushed. Effie adjusted her instruments with steady hands, though her breath came quick. As the submersible glided deeper, Sibylla felt the goddess's gaze upon her, a maternal scrutiny laced with hunger. The visions lingered, promising more revelations, more surrenders. The womb awaited, and with it, the choice that would reshape the seas. The pressure eased slightly as they entered a pocket of calmer waters, but the air in the cabin thickened with unspoken tensions. Abyssos retracted into the conduits, his presence a warm hum in Sibylla's blood. She straightened her disheveled attire, the aftershocks of their union tingling through her limbs. "We're close," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever horrors come next, we face them together." Maris nodded, her earlier fear tempered by resolve. For the network. For the sensitives who couldn't dive this deep. Effie glanced up from her charts. "Indeed. But remember, the trench doesn't yield secrets lightly. Tiamat's origins are woven into Abyssos. Confronting them means confronting her will." Another bioluminescent swarm approached, this one a ballet of glowing plankton that formed shapes in the water, embryonic forms twisting into divine silhouettes. Sibylla watched, transfixed, as the visions stirred anew, faint echoes of creation where Tiamat's body birthed the world from chaos. Abyssos's past unfolded in fragments, his awakening in the Carrington storm, not as birth, but as rebirth, a shard regaining sentience amid the electromagnetic fury. He spoke through the wires, his voice intimate in her mind. "I was her weapon once, forged in the dismemberment's fury. Now, anchored to you, I am more, yet less." The admission carried a vulnerability that tightened her chest. She longed to anchor him fully again, to soothe the fracture with her touch, but the dive demanded focus. The swarm parted, revealing a ledge where thermal vents bubbled with phosphorescent gases. Effie maneuvered them to dock, the submersible latching with a resonant clang. "Suit up," she ordered. "The real descent begins on foot, or fin as it were." They donned the experimental dive suits, reinforced leather infused with conductive filaments, helmets etched with Effie's sigils to amplify bioelectric fields. Sibylla felt Abyssos infuse the suit, his essence weaving through the threads like a second skin. The sensation was erotic in its closeness. Every movement a caress, every breath a shared pulse. As they exited the airlock, the trench enveloped them in surreal intimacy. The water was warmer here, almost womb-like, carrying whispers that resonated in their bones. They descended a jagged path, bioluminescent algae illuminating handholds that pulsed like veins. Maris slipped once, her hand grazing a glowing outcrop. Visions assailed her briefly, flashes of oceanic orgies, bodies merging in fluid ecstasy. She yanked back, cursing. It's in the rocks too, tempting us to dissolve. Effie led with a tethered lantern, its light cutting through veils of krill that shimmered like stardust. Focus on the path. Tiamat's essence permeates all. It's her way of testing intruders. Abyssos manifested partially around Sibylla, a plasma aura that warded off the more aggressive tendrils snaking from crevices. Deeper still, the walls curved into an organic chamber, floor undulating softly underfoot. Here, the visions hit Sibylla like a riptide. She staggered, seeing Abyssos's origin crystal clear. Torn from Tiamat's flank during the mythic war, his electric form hurled into the void, wandering eons until the cosmic storm reignited him. He had been her vengeance, her unbound fury. Now, in Sibylla's anchor, he tasted limitation, yet craved the intimacy of flesh. "Show me," she whispered, reaching for him. Their fields merged again, more urgently this time. In the water's embrace, away from the other's eyes, Abyssos's form enveloped her fully. His touch was everywhere, currents stroking her curves, igniting nerves with precision. She pressed against him, the suit no barrier to his energy, as waves of pleasure crashed through her. It was surrender, raw and electric, her cries muffled by the helmet as climax ripped her apart, visions peaking in a blaze of divine memory. Tiamat's voice echoed then, not in words, but in feeling. A demand for reunion, a promise of wholeness if Abyssos returned. He shuddered in her arms, the conflict tearing at him. "I cannot," he murmured, pulling back. "Not without you." They pressed on, the chamber opening to the trench's heart. Bioluminescent horrors guarded the threshold, guardian polyps with tentacles that lashed out, embedding barbs that induced hallucinatory bliss. Maris dispatched one with a conductive prod, the shock rippling through the water. Effie analyzed another, noting its electromagnetic signature. They're extensions of her. Fragments like Abyssos, but feral. Sibylla's intensified visions guided them, revealing safe paths amid the chaos. Abyssos confronted his past aloud, voice booming through the comms. "I was born of her rage, splintered to punish the usurpers. Yet in you, Sibylla, I find purpose beyond destruction." The admission bonded them deeper, their shared energy repelling the final swarm. At last, they reached a glowing chasm, Tiamat's womb pulsing below. The goddess's presence was overwhelming, her psychic tendrils brushing their minds with intimate promises of merger. Sibylla's body thrummed with afterglow and anticipation, visions foretelling the trials ahead. The descent had stripped them bare, forging intimacy from horror, and now the true confrontation loomed. Chapter 5. The Sacrifice Demand. The chasm yawned before them like the maw of creation itself, a pulsating void rimmed with veins of luminous quartz that throbbed in rhythm with Sibylla's racing heart. The water here was unnaturally still, a cradle of warmth that lapped against their dive suits with insidious gentleness, as if the ocean itself were breathing. Effie and Maris hung back at the threshold, their helmet lights casting jittery beams into the abyss. But Sibylla felt the pull, a psychic tether yanking at her core, drawing her and Abyssos inexorably downward. "Wait," Effie urged through the comms, her voice crackling with static. "This isn't just a cave. It's her sanctum. We tread as supplicants, not conquerors." Maris gripped her tether line, eyes darting to the glowing walls. "Sib, don't go alone." But Sibylla was already descending, her body weightless in the buoyant embrace, Abyssos's essence coiling through her suit like a lover's fingers tracing forbidden paths. The others' voices faded into a distant hum as an invisible barrier sealed behind her, leaving her isolated in the womb's depths. Panic flickered, but it was drowned by the rising tide of Tiamat's presence. A maternal force that enveloped her mind, whispering promises of unity in the language of waves and thunder. Abyssos manifested fully now, his plasma form shimmering into solidity beside her, a lithe silhouette of crackling azure against the bioluminescent haze. His hand, tangible yet humming with electric peril, found hers, their fields merging in a spark that sent jolts of pleasure racing up her arm. "She summons us," he said, his voice a resonant echo that vibrated through the water, intimate and laced with dread. "The mother reclaims what was hers." Sibylla squeezed his hand, the contact igniting her nerves, but she pressed on, kicking toward the chasm's heart where a colossal shadow stirred. The descent twisted reality. The water thickened into a viscous medium, caressing her skin through the suit with phantom touches, soft, insistent, like tentacles exploring the curves of her body. Visions assailed her. Not the fragmented memories of before, but full immersions, pulling her into Tiamat's ancient saga. She saw the goddess in her primordial glory, a serpentine behemoth coiled amid chaos, her scales iridescent with the birth of storms. Marduk's spear pierced her flank, not in heroic triumph, but in profane violation, rending her essence into shards that screamed into the void. Abyssos was one such shard, her electric fury incarnate, flung into the currents to wreak vengeance on the despoilers. Sibylla's breath hitched in her helmet as the vision shifted, turning erotic in its horror. Tiamat's form writhed not in agony alone, but in a perverse ecstasy of dissolution, her body fragmenting into waves of pleasure pain that echoed through the seas. The goddess's eyes, vast abyssal pools, fixed on Sibylla, and in that gaze, she felt herself pulled into the scene, her own body superimposed over Tiamat's, Abyssos's energy surging through her like a lover's thrust, demanding surrender. Heat bloomed between her thighs, unbidden, her bioelectric field responding with a shameful throb. She gasped, clutching at Abyssos. "What is this?" "Her truth," he replied, his form flickering as memories clawed at him. The dismemberment was no clean severing, it was intimacy perverted, a rape of the divine that birthed us all in agony and bliss. His free hand trailed down her side, the touch electric, grounding her even as it stoked the fire within. They reached the chasm's nadir, a cavernous chamber where the floor undulated like living flesh, carpeted in phosphorescent polyps that pulsed in hypnotic waves. At the center, Tiamat manifested, not as a distant shadow, but as an immense, coiling presence that filled the space, her form a hybrid of serpent and woman, scales merging into silken skin that glowed with inner lightning. The goddess's head rose, colossal yet intimate, her face a breathtaking fusion of beauty and terror, eyes like storm-tossed oceans, lips parted in a sigh that stirred the water into caressing currents. Tentacles, elegant, veined with bioluminescent threads, unfurled from her sides, not in threat, but in invitation, brushing the cavern walls and sending ripples that lapped at Sibylla's legs. Abyssos froze, his plasma body trembling as Tiamat's gaze locked onto him. "My child," she intoned, her voice a symphony of depths, rumbling through the water and into their bones. It was not speech, but sensation, a psychic flood that tasted of salt and desire, wrapping around Sibylla's mind like silken bonds. "Mother," Abyssos whispered, the word cracking with static. He released Sibylla's hand, drifting forward, drawn by an invisible cord. Tiamat's tentacle extended, coiling gently around his form, the contact eliciting a groan from him that vibrated through the water. Sparks flew where they touched, his essence merging briefly with hers, and Sibylla felt it echo in her own body, a surge of raw power that arched her back, nipples hardening against the suit's confines as phantom caresses ghosted over her skin. Jealousy twisted in her gut, mingled with arousal as she watched the reunion unfold. "You have wandered long, my spark," Tiamat murmured, her tentacle stroking Abyssos's chest, tracing the contours of his plasma muscles with deliberate slowness. "Born of my rage, splintered in betrayal, you seek flesh in this mortal coil. But the wound festers. Humanity's greed poisons the waters. Their iron ships carve my body, their fires scar the currents. Return to me, and I will remake the world in purity. Dissolve into my embrace, and we shall be whole." The words carried an undercurrent of seduction, her presence infusing the water with pheromones that made Sibylla's head swim, her core clenching with illicit need. Abyssos shuddered, his eyes, stormlit and conflicted, flicking to Sibylla. I am more now. Anchored. Loved." But Tiamat's laughter rippled through the chamber, a sound like waves crashing in ecstasy, sending vibrations that hummed against Sibylla's most sensitive places. "Love. A mortal tether, fragile as foam. See what you deny." The illusions began then, weaving from Tiamat's will like threads of dream stuff, enveloping Sibylla and Abyssos in a shared hallucination that blurred the boundaries of self. Sibylla found herself on a shore of black sand under a fractured sky, the air thick with the scent of ozone and musk. Abyssos stood before her, but not as her lover, as a wild thing, untamed, his form surging with unbridled electricity that lashed the waves into frenzy. "Without me, you are free," Tiamat's voice whispered from the wind, and Abyssos lunged, not in tenderness, but in primal hunger. His hands, rough with current, pinned her to the sand, tearing at her imagined gown with crackling fingers. Pain and pleasure fused as he entered her, not gently, but with the force of a tempest. His thrusts driving deep, electric surges igniting every nerve until she screamed in shattering release. But as climax faded, dissolution crept in. Her body frayed at the edges, skin dissolving into salt water, merging with the sea, even as Abyssos withdrew, his form expanding into infinity, leaving her empty and adrift. "This is return," Tiamat cooed. "Wholeness without chains." Sibylla thrashed in the vision, horror mounting as she felt her identity unravel. Cartographer, lover, anchor, slipping away into the goddess's vastness. Abyssos's face twisted in the illusion, not with love, but with pity. "You hold me back, Sibylla. Let go." The vision shattered, dumping her back into the cavern, gasping. Abyssos hovered nearby, his own illusion evidently tormenting him. In his eyes, she saw echoes of betrayal, of her body yielding not to him, but to Tiamat's tentacles, writhing in perverse union while he watched, powerless, his essence dimming to nothingness. "She shows us the cost," he rasped, reaching for her. Their hands met, and the anchoring surged, hot, desperate, a counterpoint to the illusion's cruelty. Electricity arced between them, flooding her with heat that pooled low, her thighs pressing together instinctively as arousal warred with heartbreak. Tiamat's form loomed closer, her tentacles undulating in a hypnotic dance. "Or choose merger, mortal's thief. Bind with my child fully, flesh to spark, and birth a new consciousness, one that tempers my wrath. But know this, you will lose yourself, Sibylla Thorne. Your thoughts, your desires, drowned in oceanic eternity. Humanity's salvation, at the price of your soul." The goddess's tentacle brushed Sibylla's shoulder, the touch velvet soft yet charged, sending a shiver of forbidden ecstasy through her. It lingered, tracing down her arm, over her breast, the pressure teasing her nipple to aching peak through the suit. Sibylla moaned, the sound escaping her helmet in a bubble of bubbles as the caress deepened, coiling around her waist, pulling her toward Tiamat's core. Abyssos snarled, a thunderous crackle, and surged between them, his body expanding to shield her. "She is not yours to claim." But Tiamat's laughter echoed again, and the illusions intensified, philosophical barbs laced with erotic torment. Sibylla's mind fractured into debate. What was love, if not surrender? Abyssos had given her power, pleasure beyond mortal limits, their unions electric symphonies where he filled her utterly, currents stroking hidden depths, driving her to edges of madness in ecstatic oblivion. Yet to merge meant eternity in that bliss, her identity subsumed, a perverse immortality where pleasure never ended, but self did. Sacrificing him remakes the world clean, Tiamat tempted, her voice a silken whisper in Sibylla's ear. No more iron fleets raping the depths, no more sensitives hunted like witches. Return my spark, and I spare the land dwellers, for a time. The illusion shifted. Sibylla alone on the surface, Abyssos' absence a hollow ache, but the seas calm, her network of conductors thriving in peace. No more nights of anchoring him, body arched in agony ecstasy as his form ravaged hers, claiming every inch with shocking precision, leaving her marked and yearning. Freedom, but at the cost of their covenant. The bond that had redefined her. Abyssos pulled her close, his embrace a cage of lightning. "Do not listen. Our love is the anchor against her flood." His lips found hers through the helmet's proximity, the kiss a conduit of raw energy that bypassed fabric, tongues of plasma dancing, sending shocks straight to her core. She clung to him, hips grinding instinctively against his thigh, the friction amplified by their fields into a prelude of deeper union. Pleasure built, philosophical doubts dissolving in the heat, but Tiamat's tentacle intruded, wrapping around them both, forcing a three-way merge that blurred identities. In that moment, Sibylla felt it all. Abyssos' turmoil, his fear of losing form, his selfish craving for her flesh. Tiamat's ancient loneliness, a mother's rage perverted into hunger for reunion. The tentacle tightened, stroking them in unison, caressing Abyssos' back while probing Sibylla's inner thighs, the pressure insistent, parting her legs in the water. Shame burned with desire as the appendage teased her entrance through the suit, vibrations humming against her clit, building toward a climax that promised dissolution. "Yield," Tiamat urged. "Merge or sever. The choice is yours. But delay invites annihilation." Sibylla's internal war raged. Sacrifice Abyssos and save the world she knew. Her maps, her allies, a life without the constant thrum of otherness in her veins. But without him, what was she? A woman hollowed by loss, memories of their couplings haunting her. Nights where he bound her with currents, teasing her to the brink only to plunge deep, their bodies sinking in a rhythm that shattered stars. Merger meant eternity in that union, her consciousness woven into his and Tiamat's, a new entity birthed in orgiastic creation, perverted, yes, but transcendent. Humanity's future hung in the balance, her love the fulcrum. Abyssos' voice broke through, raw and pleading. "I would return if it spared you pain, Sibylla. But our bond, it defies her. Choose us." His hands roamed her body now, possessive, fingers digging into her hips as if to imprint himself eternally. The anchoring deepened, his energy flooding her, coiling inside like a serpent seeking home. She cried out as orgasm crested, not from Tiamat's touch, but from their defiant union. Waves of electric bliss crashing through her, visions of merged futures flashing, a consciousness vast as oceans, loving without loss, remaking waters in harmony. Tiamat recoiled slightly, her form rippling with irritation. "Foolish spark! Mortal taint weakens you." But the goddess's eyes held a flicker of intrigue, the demand evolving into negotiation. The tentacle withdrew, leaving Sibylla trembling in aftershocks, Abyssos' arms her only anchor. The illusions test, but truth endures, Sibylla whispered, her voice steadying. I choose neither severance nor blind merger. We will forge our path, together, against your wrath. The chamber quaked, Tiamat's coils tightening as external threats stirred, echoes of rival leviathans breaching the periphery, drawn by the confrontation. Abyssos tensed, his form brightening. The choice is made, Mother. We stand as one. Heartbreak lingered in the air, philosophical weights unresolved, but their love had withstood the illusion's perverse trials. As Tiamat's presence swelled in ominous promise, Sibylla knew the true sacrifice lay ahead, not in demand, but in the battles to come. The trench's heart pulsed faster, heralding chaos, and in Abyssos's embrace, she found the strength to face it. Chapter 6. Rival Leviathans Unleashed. The illusions shattered like fragile glass under the onslaught of a new disturbance, Tiamat's colossal form recoiling slightly as ripples of chaotic energy surged from the trench's periphery. Sibylla's breath caught in her throat, her body still humming from the erotic anchor that had reaffirmed her bond with Abyssos moments before. The submersible groaned, lights flickering as external pressures warred with the internal storm of their unresolved choice. "What now?" she whispered, her voice raw, fingers still tingling from where Abyssos's plasma had caressed her most intimate depths. Abyssos's form crackled with alarm, his azure silhouette expanding against the confines of the chamber. "Others!" He pulsed through her veins, a jolt of urgency that made her muscles clench involuntarily. "Fragments like me but twisted,